The cloud isn't infrastructure, it's a subscription you can't cancel. And some of the biggest names in tech just found that out the hard way. Basecamp's maker, Dropbox Ahrefs, a security company most people have never heard of. 3, 4, 5 completely different companies, different sizes, different industries, all reaching the same conclusion, independently. The cloud stopped paying for itself. Back in 2006, when Amazon Web Services first launched, the pitch was simple and genuinely revolutionary. Rent computing power by the hour, no servers to buy, no data center lease to sign, no hardware to babysit at 3 in the morning. Almost 20 years later, that pitch built an industry. AWS alone now holds around 37% of the global cloud market, brings in over $100 billion a year, and runs more than 6 million kilometers of fiber across 38 regions. But somewhere between rent what you need and power a good chunk of the internet, the deal quietly changed. And a growing list of companies, some tiny, some enormous, have done the math and walked away. This is that story, not cloud bad servers good. The actual story, what the trap looks like, who's escaped it, who shouldn't try, and how you'd actually know which one you are. Here's the sales pitch, and it's genuinely true at first. No hardware to buy, no data center to run, scale up in seconds and back down just as fast. For a startup with unpredictable growth, that flexibility is close to magic. But cloud pricing isn't built to shrink as your usage grows more predictable. It's built to keep billing you for flexibility you no longer need. Every gigabyte stored, every gigabyte moved, every API call, metered and billed, forever, at a markup. At startup scale, that markup is pennies. At real scale, it's millions. And here's the part almost nobody explains up front. The bill doesn't grow at the same rate your business does. It grows faster, and leaving gets harder the longer you stay. Egress fees charge you just to move your own data out the door, often somewhere around 9 cents per gigabyte, which sounds small until you're moving petabytes. Proprietary managed services don't have a clean off-ramp either. The more of your stack you build on one cloud-specific database, queue, or authentication tool, the more expensive and risky it becomes to ever unwind it. That's not an accident, that's the business model. The trap was never getting into the cloud, it's getting out of it. And that's exactly what the first company in this story discovered. Case Study 1, 37 Signals, makers of the project management tool Basecamp and the email service HEA. Around 60 employees, a few million users, a decade-long relationship with AWS. Quick detour, because it matters later. When HEA launched in June 2020, they forecast 30,000 signups over 6 months. They got 300,000 in 3 weeks. That's exactly the kind of unpredictable spike cloud elasticity is built for, and it worked exactly as advertised. But 2 years later, that same infrastructure had become a predictable, well-understood workload. And predictable workloads are where the cloud's pricing model stops making sense. In 2022, their total cloud spend hit $3.2 million, and this wasn't sloppy engineering. They'd tagged every resource, killed unused capacity, turned on every savings plan available, played the cost optimization game exactly by the book. The bill kept climbing anyway. On October 19, 2022, their CTO David Heinemeier Hansson, the same person who created the Ruby on Rails framework, published a blog post that didn't hedge at all. Renting computers, he wrote, is mostly a bad deal for a company like theirs, with stable, predictable growth. The complexity savings they'd been promised never actually showed up. The timeline moved fast from there. By 2023, Basecamp, HEA, and 5 other older applications were off AWS entirely, running on their own hardware, with no new hires added to manage it. In 2024, they turned to their last major dependency, S3 Cloud Storage, which alone was costing them roughly $1.5 million a year. They bought 18 petabytes of their own storage hardware from Pure Storage, and by May 2025, deleted their AWS account completely, for good. The hardware wasn't cheap up front. Around $700,000 in new Dell servers for the compute side, and roughly $1.5 million more for the storage array. But that spend paid for itself within the first year, while the old AWS bill kept resetting to zero every single January, forever. 37 Signals' own published numbers, infrastructure costs cut by somewhere between half and 2/3, without adding a single engineer to manage it. DHH's own 5-year projection, north of $10 million saved, all in, compared to staying on AWS and Google Cloud. And it wasn't just cheaper. On dedicated hardware, with nobody else's workloads sharing the same physical machine, their database queries got measurably faster, no more unpredictable slowdowns from what engineers call noisy neighbors. Here's the honest part critics keep pointing out, and it's worth sitting with. This math works because 37 signals traffic is stable and predictable. They weren't betting on a viral spike next month. If you are, this whole calculation flips, and 37 signals wasn't even the first company to do this, not by a long shot. Case study 2 goes back nearly a decade further, 2015. Dropbox, hundreds of millions of users, almost all of their file storage sitting on Amazon S3. Dropbox's own head of infrastructure later put the incentive bluntly: nobody runs a cloud business as a charity. If you're paying someone else to run your infrastructure, you're paying more than the actual cost of running it. That's where their profit margin lives. So Dropbox spent years quietly building their own exabyte-scale storage system, internally codenamed Magic Pocket, purpose-built for exactly how Dropbox's own users actually behaved, not for a generic customer AWS had never met. The migration was treated like a live surgery. New uploads were written to both S3 and Magic Pocket simultaneously for months, just to verify the new system wasn't losing anyone's files, before they dared cut the cord. The numbers came out publicly in Dropbox's own IPO paperwork in 2018. $74.6 million saved, over 2 years, from moving the majority of their storage off AWS. Their direct AWS billing dropped by $92.5 million in year 1 alone, offset by $53 million in new data center costs, for a net savings of $39.5 million. Year 2 added another $35 million on top of that, and their gross margins jumped from around 33% to roughly 67% in the process. And Dropbox didn't go all or nothing. Today, less than 10% of their storage still runs on AWS, specifically the parts, mostly international regions, where renting genuinely still makes more sense than owning. Case study 3 is different, because a company called Ahrefs never fully moved to the cloud to begin with. In 2023, the SEO toolset Ahrefs published its own detailed math, running collocated servers in Singapore instead of renting equivalent AWS capacity. They calculated they'd avoided roughly $400 million in costs over 2.5 years. Now, to be fair, and this got called out publicly by other engineers at the time, this isn't a real switching story like Basecamp or Dropbox. Ahrefs was never on AWS at that scale in the first place. It's a hypothetical comparison. What would the same hardware, at the same scale, have cost them if they'd rented it from AWS instead of buying it outright? Still a genuinely useful number for anyone deciding where to start. Just a different kind of claim than "we switched and saved." Their own recommendation to other founders, and it's a good one. Don't just default to cloud because everyone else does. Periodically rerun the math against what you're actually running. They weren't alone in skipping the cloud from day one either. A cybersecurity company called Reversing Labs made the same call back in 2011, and their VP of technology later put a number on it. Hosting everything on AWS, he said, would cost them roughly 10 to 15 times more than self-hosting, even counting the salaries of the engineers who manage their own data centers. And this complaint isn't new. Back in 2013, the SEO company Moz was already describing what heavy AWS usage did to their margins, spending, in their words, many small fortunes on Amazon Web Services, watching it eat into product stability as much as profit. So is this just a handful of companies with unusually loud engineering blogs? No. In 2021, the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz put actual industry-wide numbers on the pattern. Analyzing 50 of the top public software companies, names like Adobe, DocuSign, Slack, and Zoom, they estimated cloud infrastructure costs were quietly eating away at around $100 billion in combined market value. Extend that analysis to the broader universe of scale public software and consumer internet companies running meaningful cloud infrastructure, and their estimate climbs past $500 billion in lost value. Their math assumed that repatriating workloads, moving them back in-house, typically cuts cloud spend by around half. For every dollar of profit that recovers, they estimated public market caps rise by roughly 24 to 25 times that amount, and it's not theoretical for everyone. Companies like CrowdStrike and Zscaler had already quietly shifted parts of their infrastructure to a hybrid model, keeping only what genuinely needs to be elastic sitting in the cloud. Cost is only one half of this story, though. The other half is what happens when the thing you're renting simply stops working, and you have zero say in when it comes back. Most of the internet's cloud actually runs through a small number of physical regions, operated by essentially 3 companies. When one of those regions has a bad day, it's not one company's outage, it's everyone's, all at once. Let's walk the timeline. February 28, 2017. An AWS engineer debugging a billing issue in the S3 storage system made a single typo in a command. Instead of removing a small number of servers, it removed far more than intended. The outage lasted about 4 hours and knocked out a meaningful chunk of the internet. Slack, Netflix, Reddit, Quora, Coursera, Medium, and thousands of smaller sites, all offline or badly degraded. The estimated cost to the industry, somewhere between $150 and $160 million, from one typo. December 7, 2021. A routine network scaling operation overloads AWS's core devices in its busiest region. 5 to 7 hours of disruption. Netflix, Disney+, Robinhood, Slack, even the IRS's own systems, all affected. June 2023, another outage in that same region. The Boston Globe, New York's Transit Authority, and the Associated Press, all knocked offline or degraded for hours. July 2024, a flawed upgrade to Amazon's Kinesis data pipeline triggers a 7-hour cascade, dragging down CloudWatch, Lambda, Redshift, and every other service quietly depending on them underneath. And October 2025, roughly 15 hours of disruption. Snapchat, Roblox, Fortnite, Venmo, even Signal, the encrypted messaging app millions of people rely on specifically for privacy, went down along with everything else. A digital rights organization put it bluntly afterward. These disruptions, they said, are not just technical issues, they're democratic failures. When one provider goes dark, secure communication and independent journalism go dark with it. That's the part a spreadsheet doesn't capture. Renting your infrastructure doesn't just cost money. It costs you control over when you're even allowed to stay online. Now, before this turns into cancel your AWS account today, let's be honest about the other side of this. Because the cloud didn't get this big or stay this dominant for 20 years by being useless. As one commentator put it, after 37 signals published their full numbers, DHH's math is solid, and his position is completely valid, for a company exactly like his. Not everyone is in Basecamp's position, and that caveat matters more than the headline. Every single case study we just walked through shares one specific thing in common. A large, mature, well-understood, stable workload. That's not a startup still guessing what its traffic looks like 6 months from now. As one advisory partner told a reporter after the 816Z report came out, there isn't one single answer here. It's whatever's appropriate for your specific business, at your specific stage, with your specific workload. If your traffic is spiky and unpredictable, if you're still finding product market fit and have no idea what next quarter looks like, if you don't have anyone in-house who actually wants to own physical hardware at 2 in the morning, the cloud is still, genuinely the right call for you. So how do you actually know if you're trapped and not just annoyed by a bill that's simply the cost of growing? Here are 4 honest signals to check. Signal 1. Your workload has been predictable for 12 months or more, not just lucky for a quarter. Signal 2. Your cloud bill is measured in the millions of dollars per year, not the low thousands. Signal 3. Your engineers are spending more time fighting cost dashboards and negotiating savings plans than actually shipping product. Signal 4. You don't genuinely need instant, global, elastic burst capacity. You're paying for flexibility you never actually use. Hit 2 or more of those, and running the real numbers is genuinely worth your time. Hit 0 or 1, and the cloud is probably still doing exactly what it's supposed to for you. If the math does check out, the tooling to actually leave is better today than it's ever been. 37 Signals open-sourced Kamal, the exact deploy tool they built for their own migration, free for anyone to use. Kamal takes a plain server, a rack you own, or a box you're co-locating, and runs it almost like a miniature version of the cloud. Docker containers, 0 downtime deploys, no Kubernetes cluster or dedicated platform team required. The real playbook, the one almost nobody markets loudly because there's no commission in it, looks like this. Audit what you're actually running, honestly. Move the big, stable, predictable core onto owned or co-located hardware. Leave the genuinely bursty, globally distributed pieces sitting in the cloud, where they still belong. Hybrid, not a single dramatic account deletion, is how most of this actually plays out in practice. Even Dropbox, the company that started this whole trend back in 2015, still runs part of its stack on AWS today, on purpose. So here's the actual thesis, restated plainly. The cloud isn't a trap because it's a bad product. For a huge number of companies, at the right stage, it's still exactly the right call. It's a trap because almost nobody goes back and rechecks the math once the bill gets big enough to actually hurt. And because leaving gets structurally harder with every year you wait. 3 very different companies, 3 very different paths. 37 Signals cut infrastructure costs by half to 2/3. Dropbox saved $74.6 million in 2 years, verified in their own IPO filing. Ahrefs modeled 400 million in costs avoided by never fully joining in the first place. And industry-wide, A16Z put the number above $500 billion in lost market value, sitting there, unclaimed. If you're running infrastructure at any real scale, this is worth 20 minutes with your own cloud bill open in another tab tonight. Full source list, every filing, every blog post, every outage report is in the description. Subscribe if you want the next teardown the moment it's ready.